Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Ismail, fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
I am very happy to be here. Happy Friday.
Indeed. Yes. We've earned it, I feel.
We have.
So, listen, I know who you are, Ismail, and we were having a little chat before, and obviously I reached out to you. Just in your own words, it'd be great to hear who you are and what you do and who you work with, and then we'll get into some more stuff about you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the show. Always fun to meet new people and learn new things. So, who am I? So I'm actually, I'm currently in Bolton, Lancashire, and you'll know hopefully where that is, which is northwest of the United Kingdom. And that's important for me because actually this is where my folks landed as immigrants from India to work in the cotton mills.
Right.
And I don't know whether you know now, but most of the cotton mills are now in India. And my parents still think he was missold, that he's been renting and all the cotton mills are now back in actually northwest India, which is where he came from. So second generation, went to Salford University, did a computer degree, in fact, in the day where they were teaching Fortran and we're using these cards. And way too early for you, Guy. But one of the early versions of the computer science degree, and then went into the technology consulting space, Logica, computer sciences, Accenture. I guess the key thing I would say is at the time, like 10 years into my career, I decided I was too technology focused and needed to become more business aware to get ahead with my career. And so I did an MBA at Manchester Business School. And about the time that I finished my MBA, it became very clear that technology was going to be everything with the dot-com era. And then, of course, with the industrial fourth generation industrial revolution and so on. So I've basically been on technology implementation jobs or running big P&Ls for Accenture, computer sciences. I decided to leave Accenture to go to a startup and then was a CEO for the UK for that startup called Capco. They then sent me to America for a couple of years, to New York, and we stayed there for 10. And in that time, after we sold the company, I joined IBM and ran IBM Global Business Services in North America, which is all the professional services that IBM do in North America. Fantastic role. And then a couple of years ago, I moved back. I felt it was time to go back home and see what contribution I could personally make. And as part of doing that, I joined a company which actually the work that we do affects half the UK population every month, so 35 million UK citizens every month. And from a board perspective, the UK Sports Board responsibility I have, of course, is focused on creating an environment for athletes to prosper and succeed, and at the same time, create a feel-good factor for the rest of the United Kingdom. So here we are, 2 years back into my United Kingdom journey after my migration around the world, I guess.
So I've just got your LinkedIn up in front of me. So I've got you as that board member for UK Sport. I've got that board of governors for the University of East London.
Yeah.
As well.
So that was interesting. I actually phoned a friend of mine as I was coming back to the UK and said, look, I think I could do with getting some non-executive responsibility. And he happens to be the Chancellor for the University of East London, Shabir Anduri. And he said, yeah, you should come do this. It doesn't pay anything, of course. It's in a very interesting sector which is being disrupted massively. And of course, this was before COVID, but higher education is disrupted massively. And he said, if you are good to your word and you want to come back and make an impact on society, then here you are in Newham, where most of the students are first generation and their families going into higher education. And most of the students here are what would be considered as diverse in terms of any sort of demographic. So, yeah, I've been doing that for about 18 months.
And that the chief growth officer, I've lost my teeth this morning. Chief growth officer with CAPITA. Bring that role to life for me as well.
Yeah, we made the name up, right? And we made the name up because we wanted the role to be around sales and marketing, i.e. around growth, but be more transformational rather than run a function. Now, of course, I have to run the function anyway, and I'm responsible for a quota, which happens to be north of £3 billion. But what we really wanted to get into the organization was this growth mindset. And so, we sort of played about with how we wanted to symbolically land that. So for me, it's about sales and marketing. Actually, my responsibility is also around setting up a consulting business for CAPITA. And then the third part of that responsibility is helping define our market strategy.
Okay. So that's a pretty broad brush in many respects. And before we get into maybe some more detail, and I know there's a book that you have out that you, I think, co-authored, and I also want to talk about that as well, is that journey that somebody goes on, I always think is massively influential on your thinking. And it's one of the reasons that I may or may not give greater credibility to what somebody said, dependent on what I think has gone into their opinion. So it'd be great just to hear some of your journey from, hey, I came into the world and picking the moments that are relevant maybe to us, but just some of that journey that said, hey, this is how I got here. These were some of the ups, the plateaus and the downs, but, and here I am today. So it'd be great to hear that.
Yeah. I think one of the things as you talk about that guy that comes very clearly to me is I've never been able to predict. And this, I'm going back 30 years now, right? I've never been able to predict what I'm going to be doing next year. Never. And so as I started off my career and I was at Logica doing consulting, and, you've got these great views of what your career might look like, one thing becomes very clear. For me, the things that made a difference was having a level of agility in my thinking and taking advantage of any opportunity that came my way. So anything that was thrown at me that I thought I could do, I found interesting, I put my hand up and did it. And that included living in Copenhagen for a couple of years, big projects out in Singapore, almost always never 100% ready for the role, but always feeling that I'll find my way and make a success of it. So the key things for me, I would say, is that the things that I learned along the way, if you like, is that where I've taken a risk and the role has been high profile, the higher the profile, the bigger the risk, of course, the bigger the reward. And if I give a couple of examples, when I moved for my role from when I was at Computer Sciences, and I moved to Denmark actually to be a CIO for this company called East Asiatic Company, and they used to be a client of ours. New language, new geography, new role, but a transformational job to roll out an infrastructure for the globe in terms of their scope. So a huge opportunity to learn about all of these new things. And I think that if you go in with, and for me, this is why the growth mindset thing, guys, is so important. If you go in with an idea that A, the chances are you will succeed. B, everybody will want to help you to succeed. And C, nobody really fully understands the question, never mind understand the answer. If you go in with that with that sort of mindset, I think you're better positioned to understand what needs doing, be agile in how you go about doing it, and be very prepared to change strategy along the way. So, I've had lots of those sorts of instances where I've gone in for somewhere, not really know what I'm doing, but it's a big opportunity to go and make a difference. The other thing that I say as part of my journey, Guy, is, I'm a second generation Indian Muslim from Bolton. And one of my driving forces was just to want to fit in, right? And because, I am everything other that you could probably describe. And yet I felt that I was as good as the Oxford, Cambridge lads coming out and joining Accenture. But actually I was very different in that sense. And for a long part of my career, and up to the point actually that I joined Accenture, I would say, I didn't want to be known for my otherness. I wanted to be known for how good I was or how good I wasn't. And as I for the people that I mentor now, as I keep telling them, that actually isn't my choice. You will be known for how people see you and perceive you, whether you like it or not. You're part of that gang. And one of the things that I would say is this, and I wish I had come to that conclusion sooner in my career and my life, actually, from a personal perspective as well. The sooner I got comfortable with being who I was, the more authentic I felt I could be, the more confident I could be, and the more successful I became. But it took me a long time to get there. And I think, when you don't have a role model that looks like somebody like you, or has the sort of background that you have, or have the sort of challenges that you've been through, it's very difficult, I think, for somebody to tell you that actually that is what might work. And so I think that's one of my lessons is around how do you get to yourself and your authenticity as soon as you can in your career. And then I would say the third part of my career that has defined me is this passion around anything which is new and could change the world. And so, I just happen to be in this golden era where technology is changing the world. And from the time that I worked, as I said, I did my degree in computer science. It was just coming out. And, every job that I've been in and every project that I've been in has changed the way the world lives and works. And what an incredible opportunity to look back and say that, the world changed and I was part of that. And that has really, really given me lots of energy and really, really inspired me to do different things. And I was reading this book, I'll just finish on this guy and give you a chance to talk. I finished this book, Malcolm Gladwell, you probably read it, Outliers. And he was talking about, he was taking people like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and, how they became successful. And there was always something that happened in their life that would really give them disproportionate advantage. And with Bill Gates, he actually had access to a mainframe at Washington University that he could go and play on for 12 hours a day. He was, the man was privileged.
If he'd have been born in Bolton, that wouldn't have been so accessible to him, right?
Exactly right. And that was a time when mainframes were just coming on. But he, as a 16-year-old kid, could go and play on that. Very different environment. If you look at Steve Jobs, he's got the story where the CEO of Hewlett Packard sent him a part to play about with to build a computer. I mean, this is something that happened that are very trigger. For me, what happened was, and I think, as I think about it, of course, in hindsight, was my dad bought me the BBC computer, if you remember, when they came out in the late 70s. Do you remember them?
Listen, one of my very first jobs was in Tandy, selling Tandy computers, and it wasn't MS-DOS, it was Tandy DOS.
Yeah.
So I'm older than I look, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, no. So, because I remember, I was looking back on that, and I only thought of that after I read that book, that he was this man who was doing night shifts in the cotton mill in Bolton, who happened to listen to his lad who said, "Dad, I think I might like a computer." Who then went on, and these things were pretty expensive, and you plugged them into the back of the TV to be able to work them. And for me, that's as I look back, that was my trigger point, because it allowed me to play with technology at quite a young age and gave me
what would have happened if he just hadn't?
Yeah. So a few things that stick out there. Let me pause there.
No, don't. Listen, we've got to be really careful, because if I start talking, you'll go, I thought I was invited on a podcast. So I'm going to be careful about that. But I love those stories, and I love those trigger points, and I love those moments of, if my dad just hadn't bought me that computer, I mean, maybe I'd have found my way, but maybe I don't know, I'd have gone another way and ended up doing something else, right?
There was another moment that I remember with my parents. I was at Accenture. I was a partner. I was a level 2 partner. Huge responsibility. I think at that time there were 300,000 people at Accenture, 180 people at level 2, so fairly senior. I got a call from a headhunter who said, "Look, we're doing a startup. You'd be great." And I was looking at it, and they wanted me to go to the US, and there was about 100 people working for me, and I was going to move from thousands of people to 100, but they wanted me to go to the US as part of this. I met the private equity guy, the founder, and he said, "What's stopping you joining us?" And this guy, by the way, himself was an Indian immigrant into the USA, and he went with $5, and he's got one of the biggest PE firms in the US now. And I said, the risk of moving from Accenture to this startup.
Safety.
Yeah, right. I mean, I've got the brand. I call anybody, if you're from Accenture, they'll take the call. You want me to join this company called Capco that nobody knows. And he said, "Oh, yeah, you must be really different from your dad." I said, what do you mean? He said, "Well, he moved to the UK on his own, right? With no job. He didn't even know where he was going when he landed in the UK." And I remember telling that story to my dad, who couldn't stop laughing because, he'd shamed me into taking the job, really.
He knew that was a guy that knew how to pull a lever, right?
Yeah, right. Because he was sort of saying, if you really claim to be entrepreneurial and believe in your leadership skill sets, then you better come and take on this challenge.
Yeah.
And that was actually a big moment for me to go from being behind a brand to go in and being your own brand, right? And convincing people to join you, to work with you, to pay you, to invest in you because of your own ideas and your own beliefs in what you can do. And that triggered, going to the startup, of course, was a golden moment in my career because it also gave us the opportunity to move to New York. All the kids moved to New York. 3 of the 4 kids did all their secondary education and university education out there. And for a bunch of Bolton kids who used to go around Queen's Park to then walk across Central Park to go to school, it was a big thing.
Look at me now, Ma.
I think that defined them as well, actually.
That's hilarious. I love it. I love stuff like that. And so I mean, during that process, what I'm hearing is that you've got that. I mean, you're curious, obviously. Innovation is something that obviously means something to you. Having an impact, that's something there as well. And I love that kind of sense of, I've really got to live up to my own self-definition here. Because otherwise, I'm an entrepreneur, but as long as it's safe, doesn't really work.
And then there's the social impact of that as well, because I think as I've got an older guy, I look around and I think about. I'm in Bolton, right? I mean, let's be clear. In Bolton, the demographic is such that most of the kids who are really talented will not feel they can be successful elsewhere, right? Because they don't have the role models, they don't have the networks. It's just a fact of where they are. And I feel that people, who've had this sort of opportunity that I've had, have this amazing opportunity to create an environment for these different groups to be able to become their real selves. And in doing so, contribute to UK PLC in a way that we're just missing out on at the moment. And so I really, really feel at the moment, really feeling this need to engage, facilitate, open doors, create platforms just because of the opportunity and the platforms that I have. And so the social impact, and I've got maybe a sign of my age actually, but it's becoming increasingly important to me to be able to not only go and prove what I can do and try and do great things from a personal and business perspective, but also think about what impact that has on what impact I can have on the community that I've come from.
Where does that come from? Is that's partly cultural, Guy, or that's partly, or what? Actually, no, it's not. It's just me. Where does that giving that contribution and that desire to help others?
It's a great question. And I think that it comes a little bit from my parents again. And the story here is that as we grew up, my father was the only guy in his friends who spoke English. So de facto, he became the community relations officer. And I remember as we growing up and coming home from school and going to school, there was always a bunch of people in our house where I remember our community relations officer in Bolton was this guy called Raymond Halliwell, who became a great mate of my dad because my dad was interpreting for him all the time. And so there was a bunch of people coming in and out of our house who were different, in need, looking for help. And I think that's where, this idea of service was something that was very much implanted. I then went and did my career, but actually it was something, as part of me realizing my authenticity. I also, I think, came to the conclusion that was a part of me that I wanted to be a part of me. I wanted to contribute to.
Now, I've heard you say this probably about 4 times now, which is that comfort with self, that realization of your own self, that's come out now 3 or 4 times. And I'm very clear that when I do work with execs, which is what I do, which is why it's called leadership, it was Leadership Bites, a leadership podcast, is this concept of leader of self. There is a point that it's great if you can have it on the way up, but and that's a beautiful thing, right? If you get the wisdom early, we're all about that. But there is a point that technically you know your job. You get to that point where you go, of course, every day is a school day, but in essence, I know the lay of the land. I know how to approach it. I know what I'm about. So how do I develop? And I'm not going to fundamentally learn more about routers or whatever it is. And I've come to this point, which is this journey within yourself, because the experience of you will make the message more engaging or palatable or trusted. But that's how I talk, but everybody's trigger is different. But I wonder what's got you saying that and referencing it consistently through our conversation.
Yeah, well, it started back in Accenture, where I was given the role of human capital and diversity lead. And at the time, I actually resented it, because here was the brown bloke being given the role of the human capital and diversity lead.
The token role.
Right? But actually looking back on it, it was Liz Astle who gave it to me, who was the CEO for Accenture at the time. It was probably the biggest gift anybody could have given to me. Fantastic. Because it forced me to think about 2 things. One is the business case around people feeling engaged and a sense of belonging. And then the second part of that role was people strategy, which is, what does the workforce of the future look like? And in forcing myself to think about both those things and being the spokesperson, if you like, for Accenture in the UK, there were 13 of us worldwide doing this role. It forced me to intellectualize why those 2 things were important. So it started at an intellectual angle. And then the more I thought of it and more I got into it, I realized that actually I was not being what I was talking about.
Boom.
Right? And that was my moment of horror, if you like. That here, I was sort of working, and when I went to work, I was somebody else. And when I came home, I'm somebody else. And
interesting.
This is such a waste of energy in doing that. So that was sort of the pivotal moment, I think, when that happened. And that continued, because as I went from Accenture to Capco, one of the things that I felt we could really use to engage, hire people and keep them, who were hiring from a Deloitte and Accenture and EY, people with big brands, was to say to them that you're going to come to a culture where you can be yourself at work. Think about it. So if when you go into these big firms who are world class, there is such a strong culture that there's a little bit of you that you need to leave, outside the door as you walk into the office. We want to create something where you can bring all of yourself to work. And it became a self-reinforcing thing where we brought these brilliant people in. We saw them flourish because they felt a sense of belonging. And the more we saw that, the more we wanted to do that. And so it was a couple of things there, Guy, that sort of got me to that point. But it was a fairly harrowing journey, I would say, to get there. And putting the mirror up initially wasn't always easy.
I'm smiling because it sounds like I'm doing a plug here, but I wrote a book called Living Brave Leadership, and it's about trust, accountability, bravery, connection, and various other things. And as I was writing it, I had a bit of an epiphany, which is bugger. I'm not doing all of this. As in, intellectually, of course, I understand it. And I'm even talking to people about it and asking them to role model it. Ah, crap. Yeah. There was a gap between my knowledge of what was right and then the who I was being.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a bad person doing bad things, but I was a reasonable distance away. And one of the things I talk about in the book is finding a lever for change. And one of mine has always been, if I've got two boys, and if they could see me on a live video stream and they were with their friends, I mean, they're 8 and 6, but if they, were of an age, would they go, oh, that's my dad, that is? Or would they go, oh, God? As in, you preach this in the house, but that's not what you're doing when push comes to shove. Yeah. And I thought, so if this was take your kid to work day, my little boy might not be proud of his dad. And that made me very emotional. And it's one of the levers I apply to myself, but it's finding that lever, or you might have the realization, but what then made you do it? Because having the insight is one thing. Oh, there is a gap. There is a difference. But then that's like saying, I'm not fit. Yeah, okay. But what would make you get fit? And so I wonder, it just was instinctive. The moment I made the realization I was off and running, or did you have to go through that? When you say harrowing, I wonder how much of that was, I'm actually now going to have to do something about it.
Yeah.
So, what was that shift from the intellectual realization to the actual activities around it?
Yeah, no, super, super question, because I'd say there was a couple of things. Firstly, forcing myself to do things that I was telling other people to do, but I wasn't doing, is one example, right? So, for example, even now it's hard, right? So this summer, when all the Black Lives Matter thing flared, forcing myself to talk to our CEO and our head of comms and saying, we need to get proactively a point of view out without our employees saying, I wonder what our point of view is as a firm. Now, that meant putting my head above the parapet, recognizing that, as a person of color, I was advocating a position for people of color, and I should not be ashamed of that. That sort of thing. And doing it in a way where I didn't really have to do it, but I knew that if I was advocating that this is how you should behave, I needed to do it.
Right. So if I'm going to fulfill the promise of what I offer out.
Yeah, I needed to do it, right? Or, yesterday, in fact, we had this lunch and learn on Islamophobia month, and we had various people saying, this is my experience. And somebody asked me, would you come and talk? And, my reaction before I would have said, if you can get somebody else, I'd prefer if you got somebody else, because here I am putting it all out there again, right? And I did actually do it, but it's a conscious. It's not my natural style, but I need to do it to be able to progress the objectives of creating an environment where people feel safe and people feel that they're included in a sense of belonging. So there's a set of activities that don't come natural to me, but I have to force myself to do it because I have internalized that it is the right thing for the greater good. But then the other thing is, for my own personal environment, when I joined Capco, I think it was probably the first time because I joined as CEO, so I could create an environment in my image. And the image I wanted to create was everybody felt a sense of belonging. They can be themselves at work. And so I could be myself at work. It was the best time I ever had in my life. Because it didn't feel like going to work. You were with your mates, you behaved at how you thought you could, and your mates would tell you when you were out of line, right? It was open, transparent, trusting. And so there was an energy of actually living in that sort of space, which just reinforced that this is the right thing to do. If me as an employee feel so much better coming into work on a Monday, in a place where I belong, in a place where I feel safe, in a place where there's good communication, why don't we create that environment for everybody? because just think of the improvement in productivity and engagement that you'll get as a result of that. So it just felt the right thing to do.
And that's the big question for organizations very often, in smaller startups or in those private equity based kind of PE places, there's such a drive because there's such a singular focus about, we know what we're here to do. I mean, we all know what we're here to do, but we really know what we're here to do because it's tighter, the timelines are shorter very often, and blah, blah, blah. But once you shift into maybe from the speedboat to the oil tanker, when you go to that larger entity with that bigger spread, and it's not 35 caffeine addicts in a room that all know each other every day, pushing forward, but we're dispersed and we've got different demographics, different blah, blah, blah. The reality of pushing that into a wider playing field, I think that's where it gets really interesting. So for me, and it's going to sound like a trick question, but it's not, because I think you already, I'm not going to ask you a trick question. But when you're in that, like a CAPITA, that large entity, do you feel that you really are able to reach as far as you'd like to?
And one of the reasons that I joined CAPITA, Guy, to be totally transparent, is when I spoke with John Lewis, who just joined as the CEO, one of his major tenets was a business based on a purpose of creating better outcomes for all stakeholders. And all stakeholders meaning not just the shareholders, but everybody, your suppliers, your employees, your partners, and so on. Because that for me was, I guess, a reflection of what we're talking about here, which is there's a better way of doing this than just be razor focused on delivering this product or this financial performance and so on. And John sort of communicated it to me. And then I saw the proof points in, we appointed 2 employees onto the board.
Yes.
First time, in the UK FTSE 250 forever, since the 70s, I think. A lot of interest from across the UK and across the world in doing that. And so, so we are making steps in, can you do it large scale? And that's a great example of it. We implemented all sorts of procedures around how many partners that you have part of your supply chain should be small and medium enterprises. There's no rules for that. We made the rules ourselves because that was a better outcome for them. What are the payment profiles we want to do for small enterprises? I.e., we want to disproportionately pay them earlier because it impacts them more than it would impact the larger organizations. So right across the way we're working, we're sort of rolling this out. But as you can imagine, with an organization with 60-odd thousand, it's these cultural change journeys are, they're multi-year.
Short,
I would say we're
long-term aims, right?
Long-term aims, and I think we're part of the journey. And I really like. I just finished reading the book from Simon Sinek, The Infinite Game. I really like that mindset, which says, in this sort, if you want to really run a business on a purpose, and he called it a just cause, then this is not something that you win or lose. This is you play the game to be in the game. And you're in the game for a long period of time, and the results will be over a long period of time, rather than quarterly results, rather than we're going to win this particular deal. And that's the sort of mindset that we've seen, but it's part of the journey, Guy. I mean, long way to go.
But I like that, and I like that. I mean, everybody wants everything tomorrow, and in a world where very often you can have it tomorrow, it's hard to hold the narrative with a lot of people saying, "Yeah, you're not wrong, but actually this is the pace." And that maybe that comes down to the amount of trust that they have in the individuals that are doing it, which is why I'm interested in somebody's story. Because if you tell me that, I might go, well, you would say that because you're in a senior role. But hearing the story you've started to just even share about yourself, I know you more than I did half an hour ago. Yeah. And I already have a sense of, I think I'd trust your request to be patient more than I would have done 30 minutes ago because I know more of you.
Yeah.
So I guess that's part of that. It's not the message. Well, that has to be part of it, but also it's, do they trust who's delivering it? And that's got to be a big part of it, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that is. And I think that increasingly, and I'm sure you're finding this, Guy, increasingly organizations, if they want to get top talent, I know I've talked to my mates at Accenture or IBM, and they used to get graduates, and you say to them, what are you looking for? And they'd say, I want a career path to get to partner. Now they're saying, I don't want to be a partner. I want to do great work for great reasons. So give me good gigs. And so this becomes increasingly a business imperative. It's not even a personal belief system, although it happens to be.
Yeah, even if I didn't believe it, if I want those top talent people, I'm going to have to deliver this.
You're going to have to deliver it, right? And as you think about, for example, you think about how organizations are getting through COVID, I think the organizations that will succeed afterwards will be those who during COVID treated their people well. I think that will be a massive thing going forward. Did the organizations during COVID walk the talk? Because it was so easy to send people home, to lay people off, to create environments that weren't safe, all sorts of things that could have happened. And now actually we get into another generation, another sort of phase of where, mental well-being is such a big issue. It'd be so easy for organizations not to pay attention to that. And I think this is just another manifestation of the same thing, right? Which is trust, long-term outcomes, and making sure that, the promises you make to people are delivered, even if the organizations are massive, like ours are.
So just before we move on to the next phase, I reference that as delivering the promise.
Yeah.
Because we make a promise, and we may have made a promise to get you here, or we may have been making a promise to try and get you to stay, but we've got to deliver the promise. And people are very sensitive to, hold on, that's what you said when you tried to get me to come, or that's what you're now saying to try and make me stay. I'm looking at my make-believe calendar on my watch here. That was a month ago you said that. That was 2 months ago you said that.
That's right.
And people are very alert to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm also, which is actually one of the reasons that I was aware of who you were anyway, but it also then triggered me off, was a book, From Incremental to Exponential. I don't know if I've even said that correctly, but I'd love to hear about the thinking that went into it and what it means to you and why I might want to read it, and maybe why I'd want to pronounce it correctly. And it'd be good to hear you talk about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, so there's a story here that goes back to 1992, actually. So in 1992, I did my first startup, and it was a company that was set up by IBM and Credit Suisse. So 80% owned by them, 20% by employees. And they did a COBOL generator, basically. So you drew some pictures and it churned out COBOL. And I happened to be the second employee in Europe. This was based in North Carolina, this business. I happened to be the second employee in Europe. And the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, was this guy called Vivek Wadhwa, who had come out of Credit Suisse, massive technology brain, who had actually built this COBOL generator. So fast forward, as we've gone through and so he was the CTO, I was sales support in Europe. He was CTO, and we rolled it out to Lloyds Bank, Royal Bank Scotland, Danske Bank in Denmark, and so on. Small startup environment, lots of energy. I was there for about 5 years. And we stayed in touch, me and Vivek did a number of startups. Then he went into academia, Carnegie Mellon, Harvard. And as we stayed in touch, we had differing views on the world of disruption and innovation. So I was having my career with CSC and Accenture and IBM. And I was saying to him that actually the winners in this world of creating innovation is the big organizations. And he was saying, you're smoking something, because the startups are the world is where all of the innovation will come from. And, we had this view until at one stage in 2018, we were having this conversation and he said, I agree with you. Actually, if there's a starting gun and you've got a brand new startup with the best talent and you've got an existing organization and they both went at it, if the existing organization got a few things right, they would nail it. And so we then decided to basically do research on that. And I was at IBM at the time and then moved to CAPITA, and he's still at Carnegie Mellon and Harvard. And we came at it from the academia example and from my examples of doing big disruptive projects in the Canadian Railways or United States Ministry of Defense or Bank of America. And he was doing it from, what he was doing with some of the government work and so on. And we came up with loads of examples of actually, if you nail it, if you meet particular criteria as a large organization, you can really nail what disruption looks like. And by the way, because of technology getting faster, smaller, and cheaper, and the convergence of lots of exponential things happening at the same time, we're about to go through a golden age of innovation. So whether you like it or not, the amount of change that we're going through right now is the least amount of change we'll go through for the rest of our careers. And so we thought we'd write a book. And he's been telling me, this is his fifth or sixth book. He's been telling me to write a book forever. And in the end, he said, I'll tell you what, I'll write it with you. And the best thing about the book, of course, is when the book was published and I gave it to my mum, it was the first time she realized or recognized what I did for a living. And I'm 55, right? So it's been through my whole life when my mum said, I still don't know what you do.
That's hilarious. Well, whether or not she read the book, my son has got a book.
Exactly right. That's it. He must be doing something right. He's got a book.
I won't be reading it or understanding it probably, but he's got a book.
Exactly right.
That's exactly, I think, how my mum reacted to it. She went, that's lovely. Showed all her friends and family. A year in, have you read it? Oh, no, but I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really get that. So if who's your audience for that? Who do you want to read?
We started off actually as business leaders in large enterprises. So Vivek goes around, from a client perspective, I'm going around, for example, I was talking to Cabinet Office last week or other big organizations of how can you manage innovation and disruption? Vivek goes around doing the same thing as a consultant to governments and other organizations. So it started off with, this is what we've learned, this is what you should pick up. But what's becoming clear is that in some countries, and in India, for example, it's just been published, I think they are looking to use it as an academic text for some of the MBA type of sort of demographic as well.
Right. Okay. I know when you say he's written 6 books, I had Dave Ulrich on the podcast, who's the HR guru, and I think he's over 30 books. And I did end up I know, and I just kind of went, I sense, Dave, that you might not have a television, because while I'm watching Friends, you're obviously writing a book. There are just some people that are ahead of the game on those kind of things. So
funny, right?
Somebody says 6, I go, God damn it, I've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
So in terms of the future for you, when you kind of think of, I feel this energy in you. I feel this, while the challenge is there, I'm definitely going to get stuck into it. And, we don't want to announce that you're leaving somewhere or something like that. But, what are you hoping for? Maybe that's the question. What are you hoping that the challenges bring you? And, if I speak to you in 4 or 5 years, what might I hear?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with this view that I honestly believed about this golden age of innovation. And I honestly believe it's going to be for the good. So if you think about, I was reading somewhere that if you think about the first human genome project, cost $3 billion, took 15 years. And now you can sequence the human genome for less than $500. If you think about that as the track of how accessible some of this is, the water salination projects, 4G, 5G available everywhere in the world, so everybody becomes part of the community. The technology and all of these emerging themes coming to the fore, I think is going to be for the good. Now, in that environment, it does mean, I think, that every business, every industry, jobs gets disrupted. and we will create an environment which will change the way that we live and work. And so as I look back in 5 years' time, when we talk again, Guy, I want to say that I was involved in some of those things that changed the way that we lived and work, and not an observer of it. And I think that's the opportunity for everybody in the workforce. I think even the people who think their jobs are going to be disrupted, and we did some research with this with London Business School, they have a great opportunity to reskill, to do one of the new jobs that are going to come around, right? I mean, an Uber driver is a new job that never existed. Data science is a new job. Social media monitor is a new job. There's all sorts of things that are going to be created. And I think, it's going to be fantastic to be engaged in some of that disruption across different industries.
And I have a sense that you will be. So I'm looking forward to following you vicariously from the sidelines. So listen, I'm alert to time, and I have a sense that I've said this now about 3 times on my podcast, which is with the right food in front of us, I could continue this conversation and till you say, Guy, you really must go now. So but I'm just going to thank you for just taking the time out to have a conversation. I've hugely enjoyed it. So I'm just going to ask you to stay on for a few moments while I shut everything down. Just on a personal note, just thank you so much for making that investment. Really appreciate it.
No, brilliant. I enjoyed it as well. As you say, we could have chatted for a long while, yeah.
That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.